As a local field engineer from Missoula, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I get the great honor of introducing Peter Stark, and I got to tell you, this guy rocks. He really does. I'm up here barefooted like Doug Hall, because I wish Doug were here today. He had to catch a flight out of town, but Peter Stark's story would be absolutely something that Doug would fall all over about. Let me tell you a little bit about Peter. He's one of those green people that Doug mentioned yesterday. It's sort of ironic having some guy who's an environmentalist that cuts down trees talk to a group of people in Missoula, manufacturers no less. But remember what Doug said about those green people. They're the thought leaders and the influencers. What Doug would like about what Peter has done is he's the classic necessity is the mother of invention, or in Peter's case, innovation. He took a problem and converted it into a business opportunity in partnership with several other folks, one of which is Craig Rollins from the Montana Community Development Corporation here in Missoula, and another one is a timber company. So let me give you a little bit of background about Peter. He's a writer, forest landowner, and founding partner and head of marketing for North Slope Sustainable Wood in Missoula. Peter's a native of Wisconsin, grew up living life, outdoor life, adventure pursuits, and literature. He's a native of Wisconsin, but attended Dartmouth College and received a master's in journalism from the University of Wisconsin. He moved to Missoula, where he spent 20 years as a freelance writer specializing in articles and books about outdoor travel and adventure. In the late 1980s, Peter and his wife, Amy Ragsdale, who's a modern dancer, bought 80 acres of forested land outside of Missoula. Now, Peter's now going to tell you his story and the strange turn his career took with North Slope Sustainable Wood. Peter?
Can you hear me here? All right. Well, thanks for that introduction, Greg. And what a great crowd here. I didn't realize this was going to be such a tidal wave of people in this room. I would have been more nervous. So Craig did give you a little introduction about where I'm coming from. And I think basically I'll just tell you my story, and then we can maybe open it up for a few questions. As Craig said, I'm a tree-hugging eco-liberal from way back. And I'm also a writer by profession. And I do write about the outdoors and adventure and traveling to Tibet and Greenland and Africa and places like that. Well, this all got started about in the late 1980s when my wife and I bought 80 acres of forested land up in Sawmill Gulch, which is right here north of Missoula, on the border of the Rattlesnake Wilderness and Recreation Area. Beautiful high ridge top, really steep forested land with nice views off of each side. You could see into the Rattlesnake Mountains and you could see down 1,000 feet to town. We instantly loved it. We bought it. Actually, my mother-in-law had been encouraging us to buy a little bungalow. This is right after we were married, but we saw this land and said, forget the bungalow, let's go for this thing. And so as a tree-hugging eco-liberal, my first reaction was I wasn't going to cut a single branch of a single tree of our forest. And then as the time went on, I took and we were thinking of building a house up there, I took a forestry stewardship class, which is offered through the Montana Extension. It's a great program if any of you have ever had the chance to go through it. It's for forest landowners, and I did the surveys, took the core samples of dozens and dozens of trees, and did the surveys. And what I realized was our forest was really sick, and that there was supposed to be maybe 20 trees, big ponderosa and large trees per acre. There was an average of 837 on our forest. It was a really, really densely crowded forest. So at that point, we were still thinking of building a house. And and trying to figure out a way, okay, let's thin this land, let's restore this land. I didn't want to log it commercially. I had no interest in doing that. I just wanted to restore it to a beautiful forest and a healthy forest and good wildlife habitat. And I cared about fire. As we all know in Montana, those really dense, overgrown forests are extremely prone to fire. And what had happened in our forest, which is very typical of Montana, is that it had been about 100 years ago, or the 1890s, it had been either clear-cut or high-graded, that the timber barons had come by and taken the big trees out of there. And then it grew back all at once. It never had any, and then Smokey the Bear came along. So it grew back all at once in these thickets of Doug fir and larch trees, and it never had any forest fire to thin it out, which is what it needs. It needs that, that low-level fire to thin it out, or it needs something to thin it out. So it didn't have any of that. So we're trying to figure out how to thin it, but it's really expensive to thin those forests. And it can be several $1,000s an acre, especially on that steep land. So we were put in touch with a fellow named Matt Arno, who's a restoration forester here in Missoula, and does really good work. And he's the son of Steve Arno, who's a fire ecologist, who's quite famous. He actually literally wrote the book on how fire works in these western forests. So Matt had a restoration business, like a logging business, but its whole purpose was thinning forests and make them healthy. And I kept saying to Matt, we went back and forth for several years about, well, you think you can do this job? He said, oh, it's going to be really expensive. I said, well, can we trade the logs for labor? And he said, oh, I don't know, the timber market's pretty low. And then, he said, well, it's a little bit up this year, but still doesn't look right. And I started thinking, there must be some use for this wood that we have. The reason I started thinking this was during my forestry stewardship course, I'd been up giving my presentation in front of the class. And I'd said, well, what our land is 80 acres of steep, junky forest. And this woman in the back raises her hand and said, now, don't think of those skinny little suppressed growth trees as junk. Because these trees they're 6 inches in diameter and they're 100 years old. And they have very tight, straight grain. They're like flagpoles with just beautiful wood. She said, don't think of those trees as junk. I have a friend who's a violin maker, and they use those kind of trees, that kind of wood, for violin necks. So I started thinking, oh yeah, now we have a forest of 80 acres of violin necks. But it was that woman who got me thinking, now there must be some way to use those skinny little trees with this beautiful wood to help pay for the forest thinning. There must be some higher value use for those trees, because these skinny little trees, when they're thinned out, typically what they'd do is they'd either be burned on site, or they'd go to the pulp mill and be made into linerboard here in Frenchtown, or they might be made into kind of a low value 2x4. But this wood, as I'd seen it, it was just beautiful wood, and I said there's got to be some higher use. So I literally called the Japanese consulate in Seattle or in San Francisco and said, you guys want to buy any post and beam, wood for, post and beam houses? And I just called everybody I could think of to see who might want this wood. Well, it just so happened at that point that I'd actually written a book that made money for the first time in my entire writing career. And by this time, we'd long abandoned the idea of a house on the ridgetop, because we couldn't afford both that and a baby and a house in town. But we still had the land, and we had a house in town, and we had a baby, or 2 small children at that point. And I said to my wife, if I actually make some money from this book, what can we do to relieve stress in your life? And was just retired now, a professor of dance at the University of Montana, and had her own modern dance company, and had 2 small children, and was like running at frenzy level all the time. So when I asked her that question, what we could do to relieve stress, she said, build a dance studio in the backyard. So we started actually looking at building a dance studio in the backyard, tearing down the old carport that was back there. And we priced it out, and the flooring was really expensive for the dance studio. And then I heard from a lumber guy, a guy here in town who's a lumber broker, that larch, which we had a lot of, made really good flooring. And it was used a lot in Europe to make flooring. And it's a really beautiful grain, and it's a very viable product. It's the hardest of the softwoods. It had all sorts of great attributes. In fact, it was the Viking ships that are found sunk in the harbor bottoms, and they bring up after 1,000 years. Those are made out of larch. And so I started thinking, well, maybe we should use some of those larch trees and make flooring for Amy's dance studio. And by this time, Matt had actually agreed to take on the job of thinning our forest, and in exchange for the wood, for the logs. And I actually bought back at 25 tons of larch logs from Matt, and I sent them to a little sawmill down in Dillon called Helferstout Lumber, run by a guy named Sandy James, who is, it's like way up on the Continental Divide, one of those 25-mile up a dirt road ranches. And Sandy is a rancher, a one-man sawmill operator, and on the weekends a fiddler. And so he's got a lot of things going. Sandy milled this wood into floorboards, basically, tongue and groove, 3 1/4-inch floorboards. We brought it back. At that time, we'd had the shell of the dance studio built, had it installed, and it ended up being, I will show you, if I can click this the right way. Are we on there, Mark? I've been talking so far ahead of my talk. So here, we know these issues, the fire issues. That's our forest before it was thinned. So you can see that really dense, lots of trees on the ground. Those are all skinny little larch and fir trees. That's a sign we put up, private property forest restoration. One of the reasons I put up that sign was because our land is in a really sensitive place environmentally. It's right, literally on the border. We have 2,000 feet of property line adjoining the Rattlesnake Wilderness Area and recreation area. And one of the main trails, it's actually a little road, runs right up past our land, right along our land. And so I put up these signs along that road saying this is not, an industrial clear cut or a Forest Service, logging project. This is a private property forest restoration. And I thought, okay, I'll really put myself out there. I was thinking about all the environmental community going up there and saying, oh man, there are all these logging trucks. What are they doing up in the wilderness area? And so I put our names right on the sign, and I put our phone numbers, so if anybody had any complaint, they were welcome to call. And I was expecting all these calls from enraged environmentalists, and instead I got a call from Bob Clark, who's the head of the local chapter of the Sierra Club. He's a Sierra Club staffer, and he asked if he could give a media tour of our land because it's such a good example of forestry. So I had braced myself for all this, environmental concern, and instead this forestry project was held up as a shining example of the way forestry should be done. So this is the kind of equipment Matt works with. This is a cut-to-length harvester. He actually, I don't think he used this on part of our land. This is from a later project, but this is the kind of machines they use in this very light on the land forestry. Big rubber-tired harvester, instead of dragging the trees through the forest and leaving all those skid marks, the skid trails, they put them on these forwarders with these big tracks that don't tear up the woods. That's a harvester. It's one of these things where it almost looks like it sucks the tree through a straw. The way these harvesters work, it clips it off and just whips it through and delimbs it. So there's small diameter logs going through the forest on the forwarder. See, these are a lot of little trees in there, not the big ones. And so these little trees are for the very low value product. They have traditionally been a very low value product. Those are large logs from a restoration site. That's right next to our land. Actually, that's in Sawmill Gulch, but it's a different restoration site. I just took these this summer, but it's the same idea. So that was our land, literally our property before. That's the way it's looking after. So I came up with that idea using those large trees for flooring. Western larch, many of you know, it's a special tree in my mind. Its needles turn golden in the fall and drop off and then regenerate in the spring. So here's the first flooring that Sandy James milled for us. We brought it into the studio. That's flooring installer Shannon O'Keefe and Dean from I'm spacing on his last name, from the Forest Service, who was involved in the small diameter work. Flooring laid down, Shannon coating it. There's the finished studio with a painting in the background. Our guest room upstairs from the studio, same floor, this small diameter larch. That's some of the grain. I can't tell how distinct that is from my angle, but it's really beautiful grain. I call it honey and cinnamon with these dark pinhole knots. A dancer on the floor. There are dancers dancing. Well, we put down this floor, and it instantly attracted a lot of attention from architects and from the Forest Service and from people like Craig Rawlings from MCDC, who has recently been hired as their small wood agent. I was invited to speak at timber conferences at that point, and I was writing for Outside Magazine, and they asked me to write a story about this. They said, what are you doing? I said, I have to, I was talking to an editor one day and said, I have to run off to talk to this conference. She said, well, what kind of conference? And I said, well, it's like a timber conference. And she said, now, why are you talking to a timber conference? And I told her the story, and she was intrigued by it. And Outside Magazine, I don't know if any of you know, it's not exactly, it's a very green magazine. It does not exactly embrace the timber industry, but they wanted to hear the story. So I wrote an essay about all this for them, and that attracted a lot of attention. So I started thinking, well, maybe we should do something with this. And I was getting encouragement from Craig and from other people to maybe make this a little business. So Matt Arno, the forester, and I, and Shannon, the installer, and another guy named Mike Wood, who is a lawyer, forester, environmentalist, lawyer, forester, got together, and we founded a little company called North Slope Sustainable Wood. And here we are today with this little company that's since grown, still little, but it's grown a little bigger, but it has some very high-profile projects. This is the Street of Dreams. It's the big parade of homes out in Seattle. This 5 custom houses built especially for this Street of Dreams. And this one was a really beautiful house. And they called it the Tamarack House. They named it after the floor because larch is also known as tamarack. It's a governor's mansion here in Helena. The governor and his wife Nancy put in flooring that we were a partnership in that project. They put in small diameter larch, and that was at this point we'd gone from Sandy James, who between his fiddling and his ranching and his one-man saw couldn't provide enough of the wood for us. We were working and still are with Tricon, which is a high-speed stud mill out in St. Regis, and which has been great to work with, accommodating this idea. And they stockpile logs for us, and they'll do a run for us of 1-inch thick boards instead. They normally make 2x4s, but they'll do 1-inch thick boards all at once for our larch. So this was a project. This is a big partner project with the Montana governor between Tricon and Buckeye Hardwood up in our Lee, and us, and Montana Community Development here in town. It's a high-end boutique in Eileen Fisher, a very trendy clothing boutique. It's a national chain. That's up in Oregon. This was kind of a funny story that I got a call like the day before Christmas 2 years ago for the design from New York, for the designer from Eileen Fisher, saying, well, the fire marshal is telling us we have to put in class 2 fire retardant flooring, and the only flooring I can find after doing all this research and talking to the Wood Institute is larch. So can you get us some larch like right now? That's a little example of trim. So there's a house here in Missoula. Just put in this our trim and this really beautiful handrails they had custom made. So then we started thinking about other products and what can you do with these small diameter trees? And somebody, I think a number of people kind of came up with this idea of working with a local window manufacturer here in town with a long reputation, good reputation, Clausen Windows. And I think, is Bill Clausen here today? I know he was. There's Bill right over there. So we partnered up with Clausen and Bill was very receptive to this idea. In fact, I think you guys might have come up with the idea. I don't know who first started it, but we all started talking about this, and now they're making a window from this small diameter larch, a really green and very beautiful window. It's called the North Slope window by Clausen. And that's attracted a lot of attention. That's just coming out right now. This is a house in Missoula with live edge trim. So the trim, you can see it just above the stairs with a bark actually still on the edge of the trim. Same house, cabinets in a winery, 10 Spoon Winery here in town. More cabinets. We provided the studs from small diameter fir. These are all from forest restoration sites. I mean, we're way past our land. We work with the Forest Service and other private landowners on forest restoration work and use the small diameter material. These are studs. The woman just up here was from the First Interstate, going green, LEED, and the credit union across town is going green with a LEED rating too, and so they wanted to use these studs, and they talked to us about providing those studs. And this is a project that's the most recent project we've been involved in. This is where the Sierra Club actually spearheaded this project, and the Sierra Club does not normally embrace timber harvesting. This is actually a fuels reduction project in Sawmill Gulch. It's right near our land, that same area. And it was a collaboration between the Sierra Club, the Society of American Foresters, and the Forest Service. So that's how it looks before restoration. Matt's actually involved in that project too. And that's the same spot. Just those two spots are probably 100 feet apart, right, after the restoration. And here's our end grain you can see the small diameter and how tight that grain is. I was trying to, just before I ran over here, I was trying to get our logo up there. We have a really cool logo with a little bird, and our brand name is Treadlight, and our logo is our logo has a little bird over the Treadlight sign, and our tagline is "New Floors Restoring Old Growth." So that's our identity. Now it's New Floors, Trim, and Windows Restoring Old Growth, but we have to keep adding to that tagline. So I think that's the last slide I have here. But that's that's our story in short. I'm happy to answer questions that there are a number of obstacles that we've faced that you all as business owners and operators have probably dealt with as well. Some of the biggest ones are our costs are high. We subcontract a lot of our manufacturing, almost all of our manufacturing. So it's very hard for us to compete on price with, right now we're trying to sell to the West, and we do sell to the West Coast a fair amount. usually factory direct to individual homeowners, but we're trying to get into some of the markets out there through some of the distributors, and it's very hard for us to compete with the fir that's being produced by the big mills on the West Coast, and it's hard for us to compete with price. I mean, we can always compete with our story. People who know green and hear our story know that we're really green. We'll put our greenness up against anybody's greenness. So on story, we can compete. On price, it's a lot harder. A lot of flooring these days it's actually, the wood will be grown in the United States, harvested in the United States, and sent to China for milling, and then be sent back from China for milling and finishing, be sent back here. And that's where you can find a lot of the cheap flooring is milled over there, which we refuse to do. So we're trying to keep it as local as possible and make that our identity. But that's one of the big obstacles. And I'm at the point right now where I am a writer by profession, and I'm at this. Another big obstacle is which way I'm going to go with this. We've had investors start to approach us, interested in investing, and I'm wondering, is it time to really ramp up? Am I going to ramp up and do this, take the big dive into it, or keep one foot in the writing world? And so that's another obstacle, is my personal internal division about all this. But I really believe in it, and I know it's going to do really well for someone eventually. There are a lot of barriers still, but those are a couple of them. And another is the whole wood certification issue, which is a very complicated one. But that the highest certifying body in the country, or in the world, the FSC, is an environmental group, does not recognize wood from Forest Service lands, from public lands in the United States. So we can't get this official green stamp that would help us a lot in all these green building systems. So that's another obstacle. But anyway, I'm rambling on here. Questions or comments or thoughts?
I live on 18 acres, and I just think that you did a great thing, and I think it's great. It's gorgeous, and congratulations.
Well, thanks. I hope it's a model that spreads, and that we're trying to find some use for all these little trees that we have here in Montana, in the northern Rockies, and throughout the West. And that's ultimately why I got involved in this, because I got so excited about it, because I did see it as this, which is the whole point of this talk, the title, is that I started seeing this as a way that as the intersection between free enterprise and the environmental movement. That if you can find a way to use these small trees, take them out of the forest, and find a high value for them, of course, the timber industry will be happy, because you're creating jobs and timber production and whatnot, and the environmental community will be happy because you're leaving the big trees and you're restoring the forest. So it just seemed like a great solution. So that's what got me so fired up about it. And I know there are a lot of other things like that out in the world. I mean, there are probably millions of things like that, but it's a matter of finding them and stumbling across them. There was a question back here.
Are small diameter saw logs more, less, or the same, or any different regarding cupping, twisting, working?
Well, that's a really good question. The small diameter logs, I don't want to get too much into the technical part of it, but the larger ones, for flooring, if you have a larger log, you can quarter saw it, so you have a vertical grain log, which tends to be more stable, in my experience and from what I know. Ours are all plain sawn, meaning they're just sliced like that, so you get a mix of grain. So yes, I think they are prone more to cupping and twisting. We have to be really careful drying it. We need a special kiln for our drying, a dehumidification kiln. We tried to dry it in a regular 2x4 kiln for a while, and it just didn't work. So that it certainly is an issue.
Are you using your writing capabilities at all to help educate people who are concerned about the environment, about the fact that a healthy forest is not necessarily one that's left untended, or the fact that understand this, you see the potential, you've got the writing capability, it looks like you could have a big impact on changing the public's perception of this issue.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you could hear the question. The question is whether I've used my writing capability to spread the message that we need to take stewardship of our forests somehow. And I have done that. I mean, originally with this article with Outside Magazine, I essentially told the story and explained the issues, and that caused a lot of real interest. And the way they titled it was funny. They titled the article "The Tree Slayer." A forest landowner discovers he has to log his forest in order to save it. And so I have thought about I've written, certainly our marketing material. I've been involved in writing a lot of that. 3 years ago, I was trying to sell a book idea to a big publishing house in New York, and I've written several books, and I was coming up with a new idea, and I proposed this, what you're talking about. I proposed the story of our business. At that point it was a little tiny business, but I proposed a story of our business and businesses like this as being kind of the wave of the future. And the reaction I got was, no, nobody wants to read about environmental stuff. And I said, well, believe me, this is happening. It's coming. This is going to be a big movement. And 3 years later, it's way bigger than it was then. I think they'd probably be a lot more receptive to the idea now. But it's in that writing world, there are all these movements and trends and bandwagons that go in and out. And at some point, I think that word will get out more. And I'm certainly happy to. I'd love to be a part of it. So, yes, I guess is the answer. I'm trying. I think there's one back there.
Does North Slope use other species, ponderosa pine at all?
Okay. I've got one good ear and one bad ear, but I think the question was, do we use other species besides large ponderosa? We don't at this point, but we're looking at it, and we've certainly considered using fir for a long time. We do a little bit of fir. Those studs for the credit union were fir. What we're really looking at now is doing something with eastern hardwoods or even western hardwoods, because we're in a situation where we're a flooring manufacturer, primarily, but we have we're sort of like Henry Ford with the Model T, and you got one color and it's black, and you have a choice of colors, black, and in our case you have a choice of wood, it's larch, and larch is a fairly soft wood for flooring, and some people want a harder floor. So we're thinking about bringing in a line of harder woods from forest restoration sites elsewhere, and just to expand our line, and also using some of the products here, either pine or fir, for other products besides flooring, whether it's trim or whatever. But there's a lot of potential there, and there's a company here in town, the Montana West or Bitterroot Valley Forest Products, that's using they're trying to use beetle-killed pine to make ceiling panels or wainscot. I think mostly wainscoting and siding, but using beetle-killed pine for that. So there are people working on that issue.
You're also with folks that are doing the forest restoration, logging, folks that are in the mill, folks that are involved in your installs and whatnot. How many people will be employed by that? How many jobs will be?
Well, because we subcontract it all, so I mean almost all of it, but that it's a lot. When you think about when I add it up, I've never really added it all up, but when I'm just running through my head, we've got these guys out on the forest restoration. Well, first you have the timber cruisers, whoever's setting up the sale. You have those guys out there in the woods. Then you have the harvesters, who are guys like Matt and his crew with this big rubber-tired machines doing the harvesting. Then the logs go to our logs go to Tricon and so then you've got the mill, and then, Tricon will do, like, they're so fast, they can do a half-day run for us that keeps us going for 2 months, keeps us in wood for 2 months. But you've got a whole mill, running your wood, and we pay a premium. We pay them for a substantially higher price than they'd get for stud. So we're giving them a boost. Then from there, the logs go, or the blanks, the rough boards, go to a little kiln down in Corvallis, and it's a little family sawmill, and there are 3 people, and a lot of what they do is dry our wood down there. I mean, they do a lot of other things. It's called Willow Creek Sawmill, but that's a big part of their business. And then comes up here to our warehouse in East Missoula, and we have it molded at Burnage Frame and Molding over in East Missoula, and we're a pretty good chunk of what they do now. I mean, certainly not the majority, but it's a big chunk. And then we have a guy in our warehouse, or we have had a guy in our warehouse. I think Burnage is going to do more of it now, but who's going through the processing and grading our wood. So I mean, it's a whole chain of people all along. And so you do see the ripple effect from this one product all the way through this chain of production.
I have a question on, is it within the realm of possibility to use, say, a percentage of the old growth trees as you look through these forest restorations?
Yeah, and Matt, my partner, is the one who can really speak to that. That he'll harvest a percentage in that he will take in one of these. If I had a picture of the forest, but if there were 2 or 3 big trees right next to each other that were crowding each other, he'd take 1 or 2 of those trees to let the other one grow and thrive. And he'd leave the healthiest, he calls them the dominant trees, that's a forestry term. He'd leave the dominant, probably the most dominant tree, and then take they might be old growth, but somewhat less dominant. So yes, he will use some of those old growth trees. But he tries to leave a lot of the best genetic stock, the biggest, best tree, healthiest trees of the best genetic stock, at least 50%.
I'm certain that you're finding this enterprise profitable, but there's an awful lot of cost involved in the forest stewardship projects that are harvesting these small diameter trees. When it comes to the Forest Service, my understanding is they end up trading and sometimes even paying the operators to harvest those trees. How economically viable is something like this on private land where they're experiencing the same overcrowding, but most landowners don't have a whole bunch of money.
Right. Okay. I think I understand your question. And again, this is I'll try to translate it, and it's one that Matt, my partner, could speak to very well because he deals with this every day. But the question is, so the Forest Service has these stewardship sales where they're doing that thinning, and the Forest Service has the money to subsidize those thinnings, to pay for them if need be, whereas the private landowner does not have the resources, does not have the money to pay for somebody to do those thinnings. And is there a viable way? Is there a way for the private landowner to make money or to break even doing those kind of thinnings? And I think Matt would say it all depends on the particular site. That some sites, yes, there are enough logs of value coming off of that site to make it feasible for the private landowner to break even or even make money. And there are other sites where that he'd have to be paid for his labor, or paid in part. The logs would cover it. And like our steep ridge, he had a partner involved in this one. They got about halfway along our steep ridge, and they thinned it from the top, using this line machine. Really nice job. But as they moved farther to the east, the trees became denser and the land became steeper. And there was a certain point where they just said, I think this is about as far as we can go. It's just not paying for itself. And so they stopped at that point. So there's an opportunity up there if anybody wants it. Feel free. Any more? All right. Well, thanks so much. Great audience here, and it looks like a really successful conference, and a lot of thoughts swirling around out there, and on many levels, I think. So thank you. Oh yeah, I was gonna. Sorry. I don't know if any. I was gonna pass this around at the beginning, but here's just a chunk of flooring if anybody wants to put a hand on it. And I also have some of our brochures. If anybody's interested in cards, the brochures tell a little bit about the story, and you can see our cool logo if you're interested. I'll just put some up out here for anybody who wants to grab them. Okay, thank you very much.
I can't use it there. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dale Dietrich, and I'm the Eastern Montana field engineer. That's Eastern Montana, you know, that big, big space out there that a lot of things are happening in. Glendive is 500 miles east of here. And there are a lot of interesting things going on, not the least of which is Bruce Smith's initiative in Glendive. One of the growing companies in Glendive is SRS Crisafulli. There'll be a test later on what SRS stands for. The president and owner of this company is Laura Fleming. Laura was educated at Stanford University, graduating in 1979 with a bachelor's in religious studies. She's married and has 2 children, 19 and 23. Laura has a very interesting background, a lot of which I don't know, with some of her experience being spent as an investment banker. I know her as a very insightful, kind, and very smart leader at SRS Crisafulli. She lives in that wussy state of Connecticut, but spends a great deal of time here in Montana. Please welcome Laura Fleming.
Dale's a pretty nice guy, isn't he? Just in case anybody doesn't know a little the history of the company, we have a short video, and it only takes a minute and a half for the first introduction, so that'll help us. Thanks, Mark. There is audio. I can sing. No, I can't. Well, we're showing some pictures of the there's our front door. Wayne Day, and actually that's my father there, and those are some of our product lines. The company goes back to 1966 when the Crisafulli family addressed some irrigation problems in eastern Montana. So the trailer pump, the Crisafulli pump, the Crisafulli trailer pump is still part of our product line today. But we have expanded on that, and we now build vertical pumps and small dredges. There was a quick flash to what we call a flump, and then these are what we call rotamites. And we've developed the rotamite line so that we have really three different sizes now, and that so maybe we should cut that out. That's enough of that. Okay. So my good friend Dale gave me what I considered to be a pretty tough topic. And so, all right, so there we are over in Glendive, and Bruce and Peggy, I believe, are here still. Yes, right. And you've all met Kathleen and Chad because they were the big winners earlier. Anyway, so our assignment was to discuss how we are reinvigorating rural manufacturing, how we're developing regional talent, and how we recruit and integrate non-locals. I said, ouch. And if you think too hard, you realize that I am a non-local. You also, we have friends here from the Woods Power Group. They were up in Wolf Point and they fled to Laurel. So first of all, we will not flee, okay? So we have expanded on the plant in Glendive and are looking forward to really building the community and building the company there. I want to just, I left my shoes on, despite what Doug Hall said, but he's right. There is a DNA of inventiveness, and we practice that. So that is a picture of the employee group taken this past June, and that flump was on its way to Australia. Oh, I did it. We're going to play again. There. Okay, this is the left click. Okay, now it works. Okay, so we whaled down by the Yellowstone River. So part of our employee group are practicing traditional crafts. And the question was, how local are we? And so I did a little survey. And I asked everybody, well, where were you born? And did you go to the high school? And did you go to the community college? And over 50% of our employee group is local. And some people are second or third generation. And sometimes when we're recruiting, we find that somebody wants to come back home. And that's been a very successful recruitment. And Kathy McLean, whom you all met earlier, is one of those. We also piggyback when someone's recruited for one of the other employers in town, and we get the bonus. So the USDA, the Glendive Medical Center, the Montana Department of Transportation, or UPS. So we're often kind of picking up the spouse who's already in town. And who hasn't been to Glendive? Everyone here has been to Glendive? Oh, phew. Okay, so we don't need to talk about that. Okay, so some people, you know, we have a mix in our group. Some are supermen and superwomen. In the smaller communities, obviously, I think people do more. That's my impression. I don't know. But my impression is that smaller communities make supermen and superwomen because they have to do more. And they're very active in their families. And then we have some who just like to keep to their own life, and we have hired a few ex-felons, as my friend Joe helped me clarify that. But we're a pretty young group, which might surprise people. I don't know our exact average age, but it's probably 35. So we're breaking the trends in terms of having young employees in the region. We're currently recruiting. So we have at least 4 positions open, and I'd be happy to take any excuse me. Our recruiting is pretty simple, straightforward. We do use the job service, we do use local and regional papers, and we do use online advertising. The department heads do their own recruiting. We're not quite large enough to have a human resource department. We do on-the-job training. We have done some training with the Montana Manufacturers Extension Center over the past 2-3 years, really for the first time. When the company shuts down, everybody participates. I think that's been very helpful. The Commerce Department has been a great source of support to us. we send people off-site various places, and we do work with the local college on some training. I consider us a kind of craftsman, and we're all practicing our craft. So we work hard and we do what we're asked. What can I say? We have recently invested in the plant, but we're still frugal. There's something about eastern Montana that's just really got the frugal thing going. So we practice that at the same time that we're trying to incorporate these new concepts of lean manufacturing. And we're pretty serious about that and trying to do a good job of it. We have a diverse clientele. Our friend Doug Hall would probably say that we sell 28 different kinds of jelly. But we are still selling quite a bit in-state, but we love to export, and that's been very helpful to us. So our sales last year, when we opened the envelope at the end of the year, it was 3.393, and that was our phone number. So go figure. Our sales are increasing. We have a fairly substantial payroll. It's a close, living in Glendive, I don't know, Chad would probably say, over the course of a year, we spend a lot of time with each other. So we try not to shoot each other. We do lose some talent. We recently lost talent to Arch Coal, Texas Instruments, Halliburton, WBI. We try and stay competitive. We do have profit sharing and good benefits. We have recruited from out of state. We've brought recruits in from New Jersey, Texas, Wyoming, Kansas, North Carolina, and none of them stayed. So to the topic that I'm speaking on, that's an interesting piece. Many people need a mall. They don't understand how to live without a mall within 200 miles. Family members are not happy. It doesn't work. So it kind of goes back a little bit to the what's the hook? How do we get somebody to move to Glendive? Our products are in the water industry. Sometimes we have long lead times. We work with consulting engineers, and our products are also often affected by weather conditions. There's the pop quiz. SRS stands for Sludge Removal Systems. We're experts in sludge. And why did the new owners keep the Christofoli family name, and it's a brand name? I was going to make a very bad joke about acquiring the company. 3 Christofoli brothers founded the company, and they're Italian. They had to sell the company in 1982. So a German family bought it. But to this day, all 3 branches of the Christofoli family still own the company, and that's a secret. No. Anybody get the joke? They sold the company, but they never told anybody. So, so we're often asked, why do you keep the family name? It's a brand. Just some more pictures of what we do in Glendive, the Badlands Drifters Car Show, paddlefish season, and then one of my special commitments, and Peggy Iba is here. She has helped bring the Miss Montana pageant to Glendive, and we invite the pageant contestants to the plant and do a photo shoot with the girls. So there are some of our winners. Back to Doug Hall. I did go to Beijing this summer, and I was at the Olympics. So this is just a quick shot of some old friends, new friends. This is my great niece, Xiang. And Doug was saying how we basically should all pay attention to China. I disagree with him, and I just 28年以前我在北京. So that 28 years ago, I was a student there and have stayed in touch with many old friends. And I think Montana should do some exchange programs with Chinese students. And I was promoting that a little bit, kind of off the record when I was there. Okay, so this is the question. Are we recruiting to Glendive or to SRS Christofoli, and how does that work together? When we're recruiting in state, because everybody just wants made in Montana people were poaching from everybody else. We've recruited from Butte, we've recruited from Billings, but so the recruiting in-state, recruiting out-of-state, where are we recruiting from? We're all recruiting the same people. So I'm trying to ask the question, are we willing to recruit and bring in people from out of state? And that's a tricky question. But so first of all, is everybody working and living right 10 miles from where they were born? Anybody living within 10 miles of where they were born? And 100 miles? And anybody born out of state? Oh, so my theory's wrong. Thank you. I'm totally wrong. So you've proved my point. Okay, I think that's it. If anyone dares to ask me a question. We're good?
Why don't you live in Glinda? Why don't you live in Glinda?
Great question. Any other questions? The answer is actually my family. Yes. We do somewhat better with North Dakota. The question was, how have we done with recruits from North Dakota? And the answer is somewhat better. Everyone, I mean, so you all know, Glendive is 200 miles from anywhere. So I guess it's tough to break out of the, where are you going to go for your holidays, how are you going to see mom and dad, and that's a long drive, even to Helena, so how do we build this company? So I guess I'm throwing it out to the group here, as we are all manufacturers. Does any other manufacturer want to move to Glendive? We could use some company. Let me try it again. Anybody else?
Thank you, Laura. And Glendive is a great town. I've got a son going to college over there now. So, all right, and like Laura, I am going to keep my shoes on because I think that's gross. So, you know, my name is Todd Daniels. I am a field engineer up in the Helena area. And here a couple weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, I was down in Denver, driving through their 8-10 lane interstate, backed up with cars everywhere. And it was at that moment I thought, you know, it's really nice to live in Montana. It's to have all that free space that we have out here to kind of stretch and not be crowded in. And the other thing I like about Montana is even though we have all this free space, we do have a little bit of elbow room. But we do have this small community that we have here. And there are a lot of connections within this small community that we have. And so that's what I wanted to talk about here, the connections between myself and our next presenter, Bjorn Nabozny. And first of all, one of the primary connections that we have is that we both love beer. Okay, and then the second connection is we've both washed a lot of beer kegs in the past, but the other one that goes back a number of years is, and thanks to the slideshow, you've probably already seen this here, is Bjorn and I both graduated from Flathead High back in 1987. And I sent these to Bjorn, and he was kind of laughing at it, going, geez, I look really young. Well, you know what? I felt the same way. We got a lot of years on us now, Bjorn, but good ones, I think. So, And I heard that I had the opportunity to introduce Bjorn. A lot of stories came flooding back into my head about Bjorn, and most of those are probably inappropriate, so I won't share those. But there are a couple that really stand out about Bjorn that I'd like to share with you. The first one is, years and years ago, I was actually involved with the beer industry as well, the brewing industry. And as many of you know that played the beer game yesterday with Craig, you have to work with distributors. And I was very young to this whole process. And I went to a distributor in a Montana town, I won't say where, and talked to the distributor about how they deal with their clients and customers and how we deal with the sales and the prices that way. And he gave me a tour of their warehouse. And I walked back to the warehouse, and they had all, it's a fantasy land, guys, I'll tell you right now, with all the beer stacked everywhere. And there were pallets of Big Sky Brewing Company beer in the middle, and these warehouse guys, and they're working feverishly around their pallets of beer, pulling them off, putting them on trucks, just moving Big Sky beer. And I thought, that's pretty cool. This distributor really cares about the small breweries here in Montana. They're working really hard for the small guy. I thought that was neat. So we signed our agreement, and a few weeks later I came back with our product and brought in some beer. And I went back to the warehouse, and again, mind you, there's all sorts of beer everywhere. And here they are, again, working on Big Sky pallets of beer, just feverishly, getting them on the trucks and getting them everywhere. And I thought, okay, what's going on? Besides a good product, besides a really good product, why are they paying so much attention to Big Sky Brewing Company beer every time I'm in here? Well, that kind of slipped my mind, and years later I found out the secret here. And the secret was, Bjorn knew these guys really well, knew that in this warehouse, that the guys in the warehouse really liked gentlemen's magazines. And Bjorn stuffed gentlemen's magazines in between the cases of beer on the pallet. So every time that pallet of Big Sky beer came in, that's the first one that got unloaded. So I called Bjorn a tactical marketing genius. Okay. Now, you guys can really see that when you go see Big Sky Brewing Company. If you go there, you tour it, you go into a store, they've done an excellent job to do that marketing. So that's one story. Second story here. There's another fellow on staff here, Jim Hayter, and I were both involved with breweries, and we got involved with this organization called the Montana State Brewers Association. And it was a group for all of us brewery owners to get together and talk about politics and the future and socialism and, well, who am I kidding? I mean, we just like beer, and so we wanted to drink each other's beer and go to tour each other's breweries. And one time we came to Missoula and we had a meeting at the Big Sky Brewing Company. And granted, all of us were fairly new into the process, fairly young, learning about the business, struggling on our own. It was just tough enough for each of us to care about what we were doing. And I remember after this meeting, there was another brewery just starting up. And this guy didn't know squat, so he was only about this far behind all of us. But Bjorn grabbed this guy and took him around, and he said, you know what? You need to do this with your brewery. Here's the mistakes I made here. Here's the equipment you need to buy. And by the way, here's some extra hoses, some clamps, some bags of grain, some hops. So Bjorn went out of his way to actually help this guy get started, which could have been considered a competitor, but that's not how Bjorn saw this person. So I put down this as Bjorn is what I call a true Montana businessman. So I'm sure there are a lot of other stories I could share with you, but I'm cutting into Bjorn's time here. So with that, I'm going to introduce Bjorn. He's one of the founders of the Big Sky Brewing Company. He's got his business degree from the dark side. He's a community and university speaker and supporter. He's also what I call a chief cook and bottle washer. Bjorn Nabozny with Big Sky Brewing Company.
Thank you. I don't look so young now, do I? Got this nice beard. I like to start with the beard. We're having a mustache growing contest out at the brewery right now, and it concludes in about 17 days. So if you come out, I'll be looking like Grizzly Adams or something by the time this thing gets over with. What we're going to do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you through the start of the brewery and to where we are now, but I'm going to sort of take a little bit of reverse approach. I've got video as well, and this is what we use with our distributors and our potential retailers. It's a promotional piece, and it sort of ties into who we are as a Montana brewery. Beer, in my estimation, should be high quality, and you drink beer to have fun, you don't drink beer to have a bad time. So I chose to get into the second oldest known profession, that's becoming a brewer, and I was headed towards banking, actually. Thank God I didn't go there. So we can start this video.
This is the Big Sky Country, home to Big Sky Brewing Company, proud brewers of Moose Drool, Scapegoat, Summer Honey, Powderhound, Montana Trout Slayer, and Big Sky IPA. Nestled in the heart of the Northern Rockies, the brewery calls Missoula, Montana its home. In Montana, we're blessed with a high quality of life. And what better way to celebrate that quality than with a world-class brew? We brew beers that taste great, beers that people want to reach for again and again. We take great pride in our beer, and we also have a ton of fun making it. After all, things can't be too shabby if you're lucky enough to live in Montana and work at a world-class brewery.
Hello, welcome to Big Sky Brewing. Come on in.
Big Sky is an ale brewery. Our brewing philosophy is simple. Brew great beers using the finest ingredients from around the world and have as much fun as possible doing it. We brew beers that we love to drink, and that passion comes through in each of our Big Sky family of beers. Moose Drool is our signature brown ale, which we're proud to say is the #1 selling craft brew in Montana. Scapegoat, our award-winning pale ale, is a well-balanced, smooth, and refreshing brew. Montana Trout Slayer is a light-filtered wheat ale, sure to please any craft beer drinker. Big Sky IPA is quickly becoming a local year-round favorite. Generously hopped, it is sure to excite your taste buds. We also produce 2 seasonal ales, Powderhound to help keep you warm on those cold winter nights, and Summer Honey to refresh you on those hot summer days. Simply put, we have as much fun making beer as most people do drinking it. We brew beers with an active lifestyle in mind. Whether it's work or play, there's little time for rest, and we understand when you get down the mountain or in the hard day's work, you want a cold beer you know is gonna taste good. That's the beauty of every Big Sky beer. Our beers are brewed to go with the good times. Our goal has always been to be a fun, world-class brewery. We plan to be a brewery that successfully sells beer across the western U.S. We're now in most western states, still growing and having a lot of fun on the way. Thanks to our distributor and customer support, our sales continue to grow. Our beer is now available from Alaska to Wisconsin and as far south as Arizona. Each day at the brewery is non-stop action. From brewing to bottling and out the door to you, there's never a dull moment. It's a simple job, really. Have fun and sell great beer.
Well, that was my presentation. Thank you. No, actually, we did all that in-house. So we embrace technology at the brewery. We have high-definition cameras. We have a full videography center. So all that was, and all the kayak scenes and stuff, those were people from the brewery. In the last presenter, she was talking about recruiting. We don't have recruiting issues. Everybody wants to work at a brewery. So we've been very fortunate with regard to that, and to be a Montana, a very successful Montana business. We're very proud to be living in western Montana. We're, like the video had said, we're sold throughout most of the western United States. We've had some legal issues that have prevented us from going to the east side of the state. The east side of the eastern side of the United States, which I don't really need to go there anyway. But I went there once, and there's too many people. So I could live in Glendive. But anyways, how did this happen? How did this start? How did we get to where Big Sky Brewing is today? It started off for me. I was a logger, actually. I was a sawyer. And after I graduated from high school, and the timber industry went south at that point, to say the least. And so I was looking for something else to do. And so for me, it was, well, hell, I'll go to the University of Montana and become a banker. I had big plans. I was gonna rule the banking world. And it came up to my senior year. I had to write a business plan for one of my finance classes. And in that time, I was discovering my junior year and approaching my senior year that I have to wear a tie. There makes mention of a tie in the brochure, and I have issue with wearing a tie. I wore one once, and to get a loan actually for the brewery didn't work, and that was the last time I've worn a tie. So, anyways, me and my issue with ties and looking at the banking industry, and I really love beer, and as Todd can attest to, back in our high school days, what he was avoiding is I used to throw all the keggers in high school, so it seems like a fitting industry is where I ended up. But I had to write a business plan, and I was doing a little bit of home brewing, and I was working at a ski shop at that time because I got laid off from the Champion Mill. I was working graveyards out there and doing some home brewing. These guys, very proficient home brewers, they wanted to start a brewery, and it just so happened I had to write a business plan. And so it was a match made in heaven, actually. I wrote the business plan, got a very low C on it. It was borderline D. But we decided that, that this had some legs, that with some solid business fundamentals attached to this, we could actually make this thing go. Big problem, no money. And so from college students, we pooled our dollars, and we got a couple of the local, we've got a local law firm on board and a local accounting firm on board. We teamed up with Warden, Thane and Haynes, your local law firm, and Galusha, Higgins, Galusha. And we actually got those guys, I like to say suckered them into working free for us for almost 2 years. It took me approximately 3 years to get my first shareholder because I was 22 at the time, no practical business experience, but I had a really good idea. At least I thought. And so as we've practiced, we got our dog and show, our dog and pony act together, and the first questions that we normally got from potential investors, because we had no money of ourselves, so I formed our company up as a C corporation, and so I was actively pursuing shareholders. like I said, it took me 3 years to get my first, and the first shareholder actually got tired of me bugging him. It was a friend of one of the other founder, Brad Robinson, who now resides in Helena, and he said, I give up. Here's $10,000. And then it got easy from there, because one of the first questions potential shareholders asked me is, so how much money have you raised? And for me, it was, well, nothing, but I've raised $0, but you could be the first. We only had to raise, at that point, what we were projecting was, we had to raise $300,000 through a mix of equity and debt. And of that, we had to raise $100,000 as the equity portion. As we all know, as small manufacturers, is a very difficult thing to do. I didn't realize it at the time that it was going to be that difficult. And I probably, had I been older and wiser, I probably wouldn't have done this. I would have gone on to something else. But anyways, we were successful in getting our dollars. We got our first, we moved into our first location January 1st of 1995, so we're 13 years old. We produced our first beer June 17th of 1995, and it's been off to the horse races since then. In our first 6 months of production, we produced 625 barrels of beer. What that equates to is 1,250 kegs of beer in our first year. This year we're on track to produce 38,000 barrels of beer. Which also, ironically enough, we're the 38th largest craft brewer in the country at this point, and we're continuing to grow at a pretty rampant pace. For me, I'm a little bit more conservative. I like to grow at a rate of 8 to 10%, because above that, the capitalization projects become too great. And we have our first Interstate banker disappeared, but I suspect we're going to pay for the 6th floor, because First Interstate is our bank, and we are actually looking. We're in the midst of a capitalization project right now. One thing that's from a small business perspective, we sit back, we have a good plan, we look forward, and we don't get mired in what's going on in the economy right now. In the beer industry, alcohol is, in theory, we're going to test this theory, recession-proof. In good times, people drink. In bad times, people drink a whole lot more. So bring on the bad times, as far as I'm concerned. So as I was getting ready for this and looking at our banking thing, we're actually going to the bank for $1 million loan right now, and I was looking at the lines of credit. I'm not worried. I look at it, and the bank's fine with it. And like the gal from First Interstate was saying, that the local banks are good to go. So from the manufacturer's perspective, I think we're in pretty good shape locally in Montana, because I don't think we've ever really had good times in Montana, at least since the early 70s. So as we've progressed in our brewing, we've gotten a little bit more savvy in our marketing approach and how we're going to approach our sales in other states. Fortunately, with Montana is a very desirable place to be, as we can attest to our growth on, I should say, western Montana is a very desirable place to be for a lot of people, as our growth, we can attest to our growth in Missoula, the Flathead Valley, Bozeman, which is very good for the beer industry. Eastern Montana, on the flip side, we're seeing a declining population growth in a lot of the pockets over there, which we pride ourselves on selling. About 50% of our beer is sold in the state of Montana. Unfortunately, in areas on the east side, it's been very difficult for us to sell beer. We're losing a lot of customers over there, which has forced us to look in other markets. Hence, we sell in Arizona. Lots of snowbirds go to Arizona. We sell beer and throughout the Midwest, and we're actually getting ready to enter Missouri. We figure since Budweiser is being sold internationally, we might as well go take some business from them, and we'll see how that works out. So we're a couple months out from that. But I want to sort of keep this short and brief, because I know we're probably running out a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions about our business, where we're headed, and if anybody would actually like a tour, I'll be at the brewery for a while today. I'm going to go shooting this afternoon, though.
Would you like to have ranch and Glendive?
No. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, the question was, do we tend to hire personalities for the employees for their personalities as opposed to their skill sets. Well, one thing what we realized from Montana is there are no, in the brewing industry, there really are no skill sets. So everybody that we look at, we're training. So it's a on-the-job training basically is what we do. We do import some brewers from Wisconsin, of course, the land of cheese and beer. But for the most part, we take people and we adapt them to our processes and the way we do things. There's a thousand ways to skin a cat in the brewing industry, and we prefer people that are untrained so we can bring them into the fold of the way we do things. Also, we break every rule to hire in there as we hire family, friends, people that we know, that we can trust, which I know defies a lot of, if you're in a business class, don't hire friends, don't hire family. Well, I've hired a best friend. My brother runs the operations. My mom does the art. And then two of my close friends that I started the brewery with, well, we had their family members and everybody that I know in the kayaking community, ski community, and my old boss actually works for me now when I was working in the timber industry. So that. Any other questions? Okay, those were aluminum bottles. We were the first brewery in the Western Hemisphere to use an aluminum bottle, and it's a pretty long story. I'll try to make it as short as possible. What had happened is I started working on developing an aluminum bottle for basically was self-serving. I wanted a beer that I could bring fishing and kayaking and something that was recyclable as glass is not recyclable in Montana. So what we had done is I hooked up with a company in Spain actually and developed the shape of the initial bottle and worked on developing the liner that so it wouldn't impart any off flavors in the beer. Well, we got to the final aspect of that where it was going to cost $250,000 for the dyes, and so we were out at that point. But Heineken in Europe caught wind of what we were doing, and we teamed up with Heineken actually and produced that first aluminum bottle. After which we'd rolled the bottle for about a year and a half, and then Budweiser caught wind of what we were doing, and they couldn't get their bottles to work to run down their bottle lines, and so they sent a whole 9 of their operations people to see how this podunk brewery in Montana can make this work, and they couldn't with their bazillions of dollars. So what ended up happening is like, sure, come on, come see what we can do, and I actually let the fox in the hen house. At the point that I invited Budweiser in, and I don't hold this against them because it wasn't economically viable for us in the long run anyway. I let them in. They decided to go with our source, our supplier, and they placed a 10 million bottle standing order. However, you can only produce at the technology at that time, they can only produce 150 bottles per minute. So that effectively took us out of the aluminum bottle industry. So long story short, short story long, one of the two. The Trout Slayer thing. Trout Slayer, as many of you know, was produced by another brewery in the state of Montana for quite some time. What that was a licensing issue. The other brewery never owned the name. It was licensed to them. The holder of the license actually pulled the license from them. They got in a little bit of a dispute, and we were offered up the name, and in the power of marketing, the power of brand recognition. Initially, I said no, we don't want to go down that road, but I was informed that if we didn't take it, the brand was going to go out of state. So we stepped up and took the brand. So if anybody knows, that's pretty convoluted. But anyways, so we picked the brand as more of a defensive posture than anything. Yep.
You're limited for those difficult things for you to do is also the road technical challenges, dealing with marketing, sales related challenges, or in a regulated industry dealing with legal challenges.
I'd say the legal challenges by far. We are one of the most heavily regulated industries in the United States, next to nuclear. I think we're right up there. We have three tiers. We're in the three-tier system. We have the manufacturers, distribution, and retailers, and there are three distinct tiers that generally you don't cross over. And so the regulatory facet has been very challenging because the laws aren't consistent state by state. We're currently selling in 19 states, and each of which has its own series of laws. So we pay our lawyers a lot of money to keep us legal and on the straight and narrow. But and it's also very expensive, the regulatory facets state by state. We have to pay annually. And from a tax standpoint, people are interested in taxes here. We pay our taxes every 2 weeks. So, and that's part of, the government isn't so concerned with regulating us with regards to what types of beer we produce. They're more concerned with the quantities of beers we produce, because as soon as the beer leaves one tank and goes into a bonded area, we're obligated to pay the tax on that beer. As an example for tax and regulations, 45% of what you pay for in a six-pack of beer is tax. So we're doing our part, I guess, to bail out DC. Any other questions? Well, I guess that concludes this part of the presentations.
All right, as an extended tour, Bjorn said that later after the conference at 2:45, right in there, just head over to the brewery. We're about a mile east of the brewery, right? So just down the expressway, and they'll give anybody who wants a tour of the Big Sky Brewery. So, and with that, I think, Steve, you have some closing marks here.
Could two of you come back up, please? I want to thank the two of you also, Peter and Laura. And, while they're coming up, I have a question. How many MSU engineers does it take to run a video? 3. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause again. Thank you very much. And speaking of Made in Montana, we do have a small gift for you here by way of thanks for your participation today. So thank you again.
Thank you, Steve.
So yeah, it takes 3 MSU engineers to take a podium off the... Okay, well, we had a little bit of fun last night with one of my board members picking at me about what's under the sign. So now today, we actually get to unveil it and take a look at what is here. So, well, let's not do that yet. Wasn't that a great presentation? Huh? Did you like that? Would you like to hear from some more Montana manufacturers? No? Yes? Yes. Okay. Well, you can. You can come back and you can join us in 2010. We'll be in Billings, and we're going to have more Montana manufacturers. We have this up here because we're really proud of the original artwork that's been happening in these Save the Date posters that have been going over time. So those are like original art. We're going to frame them and sell them. No, that's not the case. So I just want to announce that you can soar with us 2 years from now in Billings when we'll plan to do this again.